everyone, welcome to myself, Max McGillivray from Beanstalk, Beanstalk.global. Pleasure to have you here today. If you're not aware of Beanstalk, we're a social enterprise that we've created to support, educate and promote the global fresh food industry to help it thrive and grow faster. In our view, social enterprises are now rapidly shaping the future of business, especially as we hopefully climb out of the negative effects of COVID-19. And our view is that traditional businesses have the responsibility to some degree to provide their support and expertise in accelerating such opportunities within their own sectors. Again, one of the reasons why we set this up within the fresh food space. Our main purpose is to promote, encourage the consumption and education of the global fresh food sectors to create good. As such, the bulk of our profits that we are looking to generate, we will be reinvesting to create that success to promote fresh produce, fresh foods, and the benefits of consuming and enjoying fresh produce. Today's webinar, we could not have conducted if it wasn't for the amazing help of our partner sponsors. So we've got everyone from the likes of Greencell and their parent company, Westphalia Fruit, who are some of the best avocado growers in the world. We have Kantar, who are internationally known for their data that they can assimilate for you, whether you be in the food sector or other sectors. MDS, Management Development Services, one of the best training schemes in the fresh food area. Vida Fresh, relatively young business out of the blocks, only 10, 12 years old. Terry always tells me off for getting their age wrong. And they source a lot of products out of South America in the way of tropical produce back into the UK. We have Blue Skies, amazing ethical business based in the UK, but with sites in Brazil, Ghana, Benin, Egypt, and South Africa. We have AC Gotham's, one of the best fruit growers in the UK. And we also have the DeLacy and Farms.com recruitment network. So if you're looking for roles within agriculture, whether it be in the UK or America, you must check them out. And last but not least, we've also got Red Fox, an executive recruitment consultancy. So if you're looking for roles within mid-management or board level positions within the food farming sector, they're the guys to talk to. So thank you very much to those sponsors. And one key bit about the webcast today is questions. If you have questions, we'd love to hear from you. You know how Zoom works. Look at the bottom of the Zoom chat bar to get involved with that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to call in the two experts who've very kindly come along to be part of this webcast. So if I could call in Matthew and Caroline, come on in. Could you please turn on your audio and your video, and let's say hello. So let's do Caroline first. Caroline, hello.
Hello there.
I love it when we do the warm-ups, because when we turned on, Caroline was wandering around with a big carrot. Where are you, Caroline?
Absolutely. So we cook vegetables all the time. I have a small granddaughter, and so there's lots of cuddly vegetables around the house. We like to theme it here. I'm working from home at the present, as many of us are today, so I'm currently in the dining room.
Fantastic. And Caroline, tell us a little bit about yourself and also your business, please.
So I'm head of people and business development at Corker's Crisps. Many of you will have encountered us on travel, leisure, and probably smaller retailers. We also manufacture a lot of private label work for the supermarkets. So I'm sure most of you will have tried some of our products at some point. I'm guessing that Corker's has been a lot in the news recently, and you may well have heard us there.
And why? Please tell. Why has Corker's been in the news?
So in the middle of the pandemic, and half of our market being closed down, we had a fire and the whole of the site was burnt to the floor beginning of June.
Wow. And as we were saying in the warm-up, when there's adversity such as this, I suppose you've got you and your team, Caroline, you've got one or two options. You can either crawl into a ball and just give up, or you can fight back. Which one of those two are you doing, please?
We are the Phoenix. We are rising from the ashes. There was never any question of that. Fire happened on the Saturday. I was on site until very late. Sunday morning, we've got board meetings. We're working on the short to medium term and the long-term plan. So yeah, we are those Phoenix.
Fantastic. And do you think there's a likelihood that you'll be able to get back into some form of production in a good manner later this year? What's the plan?
Yeah, so we've got short and medium term sort of plan to get some product out to market so that we don't disappoint our customer base. And then we've got the longer term plan. Getting a premise isn't an issue. It's about getting the equipment, which will take longer for us. But absolutely, we're working hard on it.
And Corker's Crisps, Matthew, I don't need to tell you, they've got one of the best brands in their sector, not only in the eastern regions, but also in the UK. Caroline, it's going to be fascinating to watch the positivity that's going to come out of that negativity that you've had within the site. So, well, I know it's a bit an impotent comment from Matthew and I, but anything that we can do to help in the respect of promoting Corker's Crisps, more than happy to assist.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. The support of the community and contacts has been overwhelming at times. It's just been lovely. It's that's powering us on to make sure that we return bigger, better and stronger.
Well done. And Matthew, let's hear about your good self. Who are you, please?
Hi, Max. Yeah, my name is Matthew Potter. I'm a partner in House Percival. So we're a law firm stretching across the sort of eastern region into the East Midlands, and then I also have offices up in Manchester. I'm personally an employment lawyer. I'm a breed of employment lawyers who qualified as employment lawyers in the 90s when employment law was in its infancy, believe it or not. It's one of those things which, in terms of our experience as a firm and my personal experience, we live and breathe it day in, day out, and working in many sectors, but including fresh produce and the food and beverage sector as well. So we've got a good idea of what's happening in some of those sectors, and sometimes before others have, in terms of where dealing with HR departments and what's happening in the sector. And
everyone, where Matthew and I, Matthew, how long does our relationship go back? It's probably longer than a marriage. But where we've looked to deploy...
Which one?
The third, the fourth. Where we've looked to deploy Matthew very successfully tends to be normally on an individual basis. That's when we've had an individual that, for whatever reasons, having to leave a particular business, and they're going through that emotional state of, sometimes I call it a bit like a bereavement, when you walk in on a Monday and you suddenly find you haven't got a role, and they just don't know what to do on a legal and an emotional capacity. And when I hear this type of scenario, the first thing I always do is pick up the phone to Matthew, because I want to make sure that those individuals who are in that state of flux, they're getting the professional advice. So where I found Matthew so good is that he's more than happy to pick up a phone to an individual, and not, he should be for saying this, not even in charge them on an initial call basis, just to give them some reassurance and also to give them some initial advice. And then that's when his professionalism and that of his business really kicks in, because they look after those individuals to make sure that they are getting the best from that situation. And I've seen people come from sort of doom and gloom and disaster to 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the line to be in a far better place, and to be emotionally all set for their next challenge, with Matthew and his team having sorted them out on that employment aspect. Matthew, is that okay to say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're poachers and gamekeepers, so we act for employers. We also will act for senior individuals in terms of giving them advice, and what we try and do, because actually, exactly what you've said there, Max, is because that conversation that we have, that initial conversation that we have with clients, whether it's the company exiting the individual or whether it's the individual being exited, is that we've been through that conversation so many times before. And so we can bring our experience to the party, get a commercial outcome for the party concerned, so that they can move on actually with their career. And that's important. And in fact, because of our contacts within the industry, and also Max, on occasion, yourself being able to then help that individual move on, find another role. And we always say, sort of in 6 months' time, either the business or the individual moving on will recognise it was the right thing to have happened. Hopefully everybody is very happy in having achieved that and moved on to the next role.
Matthew, well done. So what I wanted to do today with the subject about furlough was to get a Uber employment law expert and an Uber head of people development expert to talk from the industry's perspective as to furlough, because I'm going to put my hands up in the air. Up until top of this year, I didn't understand what the furlough scheme was and how it operates. And if you look at the stats now, just looking at my information, that the job retention scheme has protected 7.5 million workers and almost 1 million businesses through this period. But what we want to do is just get an understanding, as I say, from Matthew's perspective and Caroline's perspective, I suppose it's whether the furlough scheme has worked, and now as we're coming through it, what next? So I suppose, Caroline, for a second to start with you, especially with your situation that you're in with Caucus Crisp, but also with your external view, the furlough scheme. Do you think it was the right thing for the government to instigate?
Absolutely. So our core market, so we're about 50% on grocery and the rest of it on travel and leisure. So aircraft, trains, gyms, all those kind of places. We lost half our market overnight. If we hadn't have had some protection, then we'd have been having a headcount reduction. There was no other way around it that a small company could have survived. For us in the early days, it would have been useful if we could have had the flexible furlough back then and have people working a little bit. Number one, we'd have got the employee engagement better. Number two, mental health. And number three, sometimes we could do without maybe 90% of their role, but a little bit would have been great.
Matthew, your perspective, please. Has it worked?
Yeah, I mean, it's worked to the extent where we were faced with employers calling us sort of in the early parts and mid of March before the scheme. The scheme wasn't announced till the 20th, but we had employers already sending people home at that point without any pay, not knowing what they were going to do, not knowing what was going to happen, but in the anticipation that hopefully the government were going to assist with some form of bailout. And so the reality is that it has saved many jobs. The key is now really is when things are coming back on stream in terms of how many jobs are already going to be saved. And I think the reality is recognised by the government that there are going to be many redundancies. We're looking at many redundancies already, but it's actually being creative and trying to save as many jobs as possible and looking at ways of skinning the cat and keeping people in employment. And your opening remark there, Max, was that you'd never heard of it. Well, nor employment lawyer of 25 years qualification. I heard an announcement by Rishi, Rishi as he's now known, on the sort of the briefing, and I thought, furlough, what on earth is that? So I quickly turned to my tomes on employment law and recognised on doing a search of every case for the past 40 years, and also the employment law tomes, that the word furlough was used on one occasion in a case used in the Court of Appeal, which was an American case. And so it did not exist in the UK employment law. So overnight, the government introduced, so for businesses, not only was it difficult for businesses, but introduced to experts in the field, employment lawyers, a concept which had never previously been known or used in the history of UK employment law.
Caroline, not to embarrass you, but were you aware of furlough before we got into the COVID-19 situation?
Absolutely not at all. So it was a new one, it was coming out, like many people like Matt. We were just sort of Googling it and trying to find out to try to understand it, but yeah, unheard of.
Do either of you know where the furlough scheme originated from? Because it's obviously been duplicated globally. Do you know where it comes from, Matthew?
Yeah, as well, so bit of a language history lesson. So the actual word furlough comes from the Dutch word verlof, which means to take a leave of absence. The US and the Australians have used it in previous years, and in fact, as Caroline said, we did the same, sort of sitting there Googling at 5 o'clock on the announcement of the night, on the Friday night of the 20th of March when it was announced. We found many articles in US law firms, but it was used a significant amount after 9/11, where airlines had to furlough pilots, because if you remember, that period subsequent to 9/11 where the planes weren't flying, nothing was happening. And so there was quite a lot of commentary in the media at that point, in the US media, about pilots being furloughed. We went about that weekend because we already had clients trying to understand what this was about. And we managed to pull together a template letter from our understanding of UK contractual employment law and statutory position, and then looking at how it had been introduced in Australia in the past and how it had been introduced in the US, to put together the very first sort of furlough letters before the government even announced the full detail of the scheme, which was in reality a good 3 weeks later before we had that full detail. So, we were, dare I say it, we were making it up as we went along, as indeed were the government, but got ourselves into a good position fairly quickly with the client base, because clients needed to know how did you furlough an employee. The other question is, even now, was that the right pronunciation of it?
Yes.
Were you furloughing or were you furloughing? There was many a conversation where clients were phoning you up, not quite sure what this was all about, and being thrown in the deep end to deal with it. And it has been, it's been a success, but the real measure will be in 6 to 12 months' time as to how many jobs have been saved and businesses have survived. That will be the key.
Well done, because I was going to trying to be completely non-political, but I was going to bring that up and your comments as to whether it's been a success. I suppose if you've been negative, is it postponing the inevitable, and has the government burnt a whole truckload of money trying to keep people in business when there might be this car crash coming down the line economically 3 months, 6 months down the line? What do you think, Caroline?
So I think it's just giving everything breathing space. So there's been some companies. So a family friend's company, their business was going to close down. They furloughed absolutely everyone. And there were some 100 people in the business. 2 days later, they realized that their business could actually manufacture PPE. And so they started, and from initially producing 100,000 units a week, they're currently at 600,000. They're working 24/7 for the first time in that business history. And they've been asked to produce 1.1 million units per week. And so in terms of growth for that business and employment, but at one stage back in March, it looked so sad for this old family business. And so I think that there are some good stories out there, and it will just be where we're expecting to see growth will be perhaps different from where it's been before.
Well said. And on these various webinars that we've conducted, we've been coming up with new phrases of the new norm, reset, companies and individuals pivoting. And that example that you gave, Caroline, what a fantastic example.
Yeah.
If they've been doom and gloom and just taken a view, well, that's it, we're just going to make everyone redundant now, and look at them now, they wouldn't have seen that potential. Matthew, what's your view? Do you think that the scheme was the right way to go, or if you were Boris Johnson, would you have gone down a different route, do you think?
I think in terms of it was creative, it has kicked the can down the road. So there are some businesses, and that's why we're talking to clients now, where those jobs will not come back. So the question mark, and the really interesting question we get asked at the moment is, legally, should we continue to furlough, or can we continue to furlough? But actually, morally, should we be doing it? Should we be taking this money from the government in order to continue individuals on a furlough, who are remaining on furlough, when actually the reality is that their job has come to an end, that job is redundant? So really interesting concepts. But from what Caroline has said, also the number of businesses that we have seen, very unusual, who have been chameleon-like in terms of that they've changed what they do overnight, have turned on a penny, and the assistance of the furlough scheme, where a skill base wasn't required, potentially those individuals would have been made redundant, but they've managed to turn on a penny and actually are creating or doing something completely different to what they were doing, but using those skills. And where those skills can't be used, then they'll be able to use the furlough scheme for the time being. What we do have, and the change comes into effect at the end of this month, on the 1st of July, is that we've got the flexible furlough scheme. Somebody in Whitehall had a sense of humour when they came up with that in the acronym. But the flexible furlough scheme will come in place, which hopefully will, as businesses start to pick up and as we move out of lockdown, that there will be an opportunity of actually taking the government's pay in terms of helping furlough, but also getting people back in and looking at those alternatives, or looking at putting into play those systems which might not necessarily have been in place to look at new marketplaces. So, I'm sure it will, in the long term, would have saved many businesses. The other thing which many people don't realise is that if these businesses had have all gone bust and employees had not been on furlough, if a business becomes insolvent, who pays the redundancy and who then pays the notice for those individuals? Well, it's the government. it's the National Insurance Fund picks it up, the Insolvency Service picks it up. So actually what the government have done is that they're very clever in realising that you're either going to pay these vast amounts of redundancy and these vast amounts of notice for making people redundant, because they were going to pick up the bill if a business became insolvent. So instead of that, they've managed to keep those jobs going, and at the same time, by keeping employees in work, hopefully there will be contributions in turn to NI and PAYE and the fund. But if all those individuals had been out there unemployed, not contributing to national insurance or PAYE, not being able to purchase and keeping the whole economy going, would have been in an even more difficult position. So interesting enough, and we could still see those funds having to be paid by the government when businesses become insolvent, and employees will be making claims on the Insolvency Service or the National Insurance Fund to make those to actually claim those amounts of money.
Well done. And so are we now in this semi-grey area, in that if you look overnight at the number of reported fraud cases that are coming through from the furlough scheme, or are they fraud, where employees are asking furloughed members of their team to come back, to log in, to do work? And is that because those companies, they do want to get going, but they can't afford the individuals on a full-time basis, and so they're trying to cut a corner? Matthew, what would be your answer to an employer who's looking to bring people back in but doesn't want to pay? How do we get around it?
I mean, Caroline, well, we can't get around it. It's a fraud on the revenue.
Okay.
So the position at the moment is that when you're on furlough, you are on furlough. Although interesting enough, there was a case, Nottingham County Court judge in first instance last week, where a witness in a case failed to turn up because he said, well, I couldn't give evidence because I was on furlough. I'm not allowed to do anything for my employer whilst on furlough. And the position currently is actually providing services to the employer. And in that case, the judge actually said, well, no, you were providing services to the judiciary, to the court. You weren't providing services to the employer. So, if you're preparing a witness statement for a court case, are you then effectively outside of being on furlough, and you can provide that service to your employer? It's a very difficult area, and as you say, potentially grey. But where we are at the moment, if you need to bring back an employee, you've either got to take them off furlough completely, in which case you potentially miss that 3-week period in which because there's a current minimum of 3 weeks that they have to be furloughed at the moment to be able to make the claim. But that's going to be reduced in terms of being able to have a flexible basis of getting somebody in for 2 days a week, paying them for those 2 days, but actually claiming furlough for the balance of those 3 days in a given week. So if you can at the moment wait, then wait. But there's the old adage: you don't let the tax tail wag the dog. So if actually you need to go forward with what you're doing, the commercial decision is, look, you're going to have to take the hit, lose the furlough payment, and bring the individual back off furlough. But don't, the risk is if you actually then, for that one individual, you could compromise your entire furlough claim before HMRC. So yeah, I'm not going to tell you to go out, of course I'm not, but actually there's a sensible reason for not doing that at this stage, because you could compromise your entire claim.
And when you say the entire claim, do you mean the entire claim for that individual? Or,
could be, it potentially could be for everything. So the consultation started and it ended, I believe, last Friday. HMRC did in terms of the issues regarding penalties and enforcement of abuse of the furlough scheme. And we're waiting for that guidance to come out. But it's hoped, and at the moment, the suggestion is that you have a month's grace to sort of put your hand up and say, sorry, we got it wrong. And hopefully, HMRC will be lenient in those circumstances, but they will be looking for potential fraud. And the dates which were set originally, in their mind, they knew straight away that there would be potential fraud, because there was a risk that payrolls would be set up overnight with fictitious names put upon those payrolls in order to make vast claims on the furlough scheme by the government. So you needed to have that payroll set up by the given dates at the end of February, and then it moved into a date into March, 19th of March, for individuals to be able to claim.
And although our subject today is about the furlough scheme, I'm concerned about the government bounce back scheme, where a number of businesses I'm aware of applied for that and very quickly got the funding from the government. So if people aren't aware, that there is this bounce back scheme where you can apply, and depending on your turnover, you can have a figure of upwards of £50,000 transferred into your business, and you have that free for 12 months. Then you can then pay that back over a 6-year period at a fixed 2.5% interest rate with no penalties if you pay it back early. But I think it was a week ago, the Financial Times indicated that of that scheme, the view is that 40 to 50% of companies will not be able to pay that back within the next year. And in normal trading circumstances, if those companies had applied for that loan, 30 to 40% of them wouldn't have been applicable on a financial credit basis to have got it in the first place. So Matthew, it does feel like there's as well as the government paying out, and the hope that some of the money they hoped that would come back in, they might be waiting for a long time for some of that money.
Max, we don't know. I mean, things are changing by the day, aren't they? I mean, in terms of the fresh produce sector and in terms of what was happening in the food sector, if you think overnight, the sales which were being increased significantly within the supermarkets, at the same time were being undercut by the fact that pubs, restaurants, hotels up and down the land were closed and still remain closed at this time. So, all that could be done at that stage was to make sure to sort of try and keep the economy ticking over. And it may be that those businesses, nobody deliberately wants to go, wind their business up. There's very few in terms of, percentage-wise, who might be there thinking, well, this is an opportunity now to bail out because we had those debts. Most people will want to keep going and will try and pay something back. And if you can keep employees employed as long as possible over the next few months, because of the way that in August there'll be contributions from employers, September and October the contributions will increase, so there will be some contributions still coming back in, but as I said, 6 to 12 months time, we'll look back on this and look at the success or otherwise of what the scheme was. And but we are going to be paying through some way or another, in terms of from a tax perspective for this for many years to come. Well
done, thank you, Matthew. Caroline, as with your role as head of people development at Corpus Christi, it's sort of what you do. It's you got it on the tin. You are head of people development. What's your view with people on furlough for companies that might not have a structured HR team like yourself? Is the employer still allowed to check in on that employee on the mental health to see how they are, just to inform them how things are within the business, how things are within the trade? Is that allowed?
Absolutely it is, and it's best practice too, because people are at home, they're frightened, they're vulnerable, they've got a role that they've never had before. So they maybe have got children sitting around their dining room table, their kitchen table, their sofa. They're trying to homeschool, they're trying to work from home, or they're furloughed, and they're maybe only on 80% of pay. So they're feeling quite threatened, quite vulnerable. And so it is best practice. So I have a whole series of virtual coffee mornings. I kind of get fed up with coffee on a Friday, and I have different groups of employees, and we kind of go on there, and it's always a video, so that we can see each other. I'm assessing how people are talking, how they're behaving, what they're saying, and I try to facilitate as much as possible. All employers can do that. It's cost neutral, and there's nothing to stop you making contact with employees, and it does the world of good for them.
Fantastic, well done. And I was speaking to a client this morning who employs around 250 people, about 175 in the UK, and they were saying that they've got about a third of their team on furlough, and they're doing exactly as you intimated, that they're having regular chats, and especially by video, because a monitoring telephone call isn't quite the same as dinging a cup of coffee over the air. The interesting point I got from him, as we have done with other clients that we've been speaking to, is that their view is that they're actually been more efficient working from home, and so that they're looking to rewrite their work contract so that if people want to work from home, they can work from home. Then we got into this big debate about, well, home working looks to be good. Twitter announced that a couple of months ago that their 5,000 employees are all going to be offered to work at home. I always refer back to the Yahoo example that 10 years ago, Yahoo stated that everyone can work from home. But 6 months on, they found that they couldn't get the culture to work. And so they rescinded on that and they brought everyone back into the office. So, but I think everyone has learned. So like this client this morning, they're talking about having a quarterly meetup where they will have 2-3 days in a hotel, and they will have team sessions, team building sessions, and they'll have some nice cold beers, I'm sure, at an evening. But they think this is a completely new way of working. Caroline, in your network, can you see that there's going to be this new way of working post-COVID, post-furlough?
Absolutely. So I belong to lots of different business groups. So if I go back to January, February this year, if I was to say to other colleagues, other kind of companies, most of your employees are going to be working from home, it will happen. I'd have had so much pushback, people wouldn't have believed me. But you know what? The vast majority of organisations did that overnight. We got the tech, we got up, and it's working. And so all of this kind of attitude, disbelief that it's not going to do, people will sit at home in their pyjamas, they won't do anything, actually isn't the case at all. People have been tremendously resilient and resourceful, and it works. There is something about that network. It is really lovely when you dip into the office and you see your people and you have a people in time and you're able to interact, and that's lovely. But I don't believe that that's going to be the traditional work model going forward.
Well, let's look at Matthew. Matthew, your business, your fantastic business. You've got what, 4, 5, 6 offices throughout the eastern regions? Do you think,
well, six offices in total. So yes, yeah.
Do you think your office structure will change post this?
Well, I think now at the moment, as I have to keep reminding partners and clients, is that the government guidance is that if you can work from home, you must remain from home, working from home. And I think in terms of there will be a change going forward, not just with us. We've seen it with clients. You gave the Yahoo example, but the technology has moved on significantly. I mean, look what we're doing now. We actually, what was really, as a business, we all went online on Zoom probably about 3 years ago, actually, and we were sort of early adopters. So everybody on every desk sort of sniffed when they got a camera fitted to their desk, as well as having their laptops, which they could then Zoom. But we looked at it as a way of actually communicating between the offices and the business. I think what's been really useful is that there have been the adoption of technology has taken place, and it's come just at the right time in terms of people then being used to using FaceTime, or those of you who use WhatsApp video and audio to keep communicating. Just to make sure that we've got the full balance of platforms being used there. I mean, what's interesting, I'm taking calls and communicating with clients or with colleagues. One day we might be using Zoom, the next it might be MS Teams. There's a whole raft of and some Skype meetings. So it's come at the right time. But yes, so on the back of that, employers are then got to start looking from a contractual point of view about working from home policies, about the actual contractual relationship that they have with their individuals, looking from a health and safety point of view, that people are properly set up at home and what they're doing, and they're not simply balancing the laptop on their laps whilst trying to watch Loose Women. Sorry, did I just say no? I'm not doing that, honestly.
Oh, Caroline, he's off again.
But there's a serious point there in terms of looking at it. I've got a very good friend of mine who I do some work with employers, Dr. Hazel Harrison, and she may be one of your future guests, Max. Hazel Harrison's amazing in terms of looking at she's a clinical psychologist, and we've been talking about the whole issue of furlough, and what Caroline has said is very important about getting people, keeping their morale up, getting the engagement. It's really interesting that you've got two schools of thought. Those who think they're on furlough think they're then out the door. If you've been put on furlough, they think you're being made redundant. So there's that sort of psychological issue there. You've got those who are very scared about perhaps less so now, but at the beginning we're very scared about going on furlough. But what's interesting is the coming back is that it's almost going to be a bit like reversed post-traumatic stress disorder. If you can imagine that we've had a very, very, suddenly overnight, we've all gone home and working in these, relaxed environments where we're in our bubbles, and okay, it might not be relaxed because we've got lots of meetings, etc., but we're not going out, we're not fighting the hub job of the commute and the office and the politics of the office and all the rest of it. But people then going back into that, if you do go back into it, you hit it with a bang after 12, 13 weeks, 14 weeks, however long we're going to be working from home for. And it's going to be quite a shock. So, you know, and that's why it's almost the reverse PTSD, because you're suddenly hitting something. And the commute, which wasn't a problem because you were used to it day in, day out, now actually could be a problem. So I think actually businesses will be sensible in continue to get the most out of employees through platforms such as working from home and using Zoom and whatever they might be doing.
Matthew, well done. Again, the tech point is really interesting because I always forget a contact of mine went to a tech conference in San Francisco, November of last year. And one of the things that he found fascinating was that virtual reality headsets. There's a view that he garnered from that conference that in the next 18 months to 2 years, the three of us will have headsets on and it will be like we're in the same room. The technology is going to be at that level. But Caroline, I suppose that comes on to the next question of how on an employer basis, what do we always say? The best thing about running a business is employing people. The worst thing about running a business is employing people. Is it not easier to look after and manage and motivate employees when you can see them physically rather than if they're off site? How do we as employers manage our employees in this new world?
So, you know, people think it's, you know, a HR function and, you know, all of this engagement stuff, it's HR, the people go and do that, but it's not. Everyone can do it. It's just about thinking about how you would like to be treated. So, you know, in the early stages, I was furloughed and then I was back. And then, so I went through a furlough pattern. So furlough 3 weeks, work 1 week. It's an odd pattern for HR, but that's how it is. So I know what it felt like when I was furloughed. And so it's just thinking about how would you like to be treated and treat people that way. So yeah, you know, it is great to see people, but you know, and whereas Matt said that he was using WhatsApp, he was using FaceTime and all these great things, I found the greatest success, because I've got some quite young workers, is house party. And you know what, if they want to use that medium, we go on house parties. So some of my virtual coffee mornings, because you can get a lot more people. I think WhatsApp used to be 4, they upped it to 8 partway through the lockdown period. House party, you can have a whole load more on. And if you want a whole group of you together, that's a great platform too.
Caroline, Matthew and I don't know this. What's house party, please? What is a house party?
So it's a free download app. It's virtual, so how you might FaceTime people or you might WhatsApp, but it's unlimited the amount of people. There's lots of odd functionality in there. There's like various games and quizzes you can play. But if you want to have a group chat, my top tip is if you're in the house party and you've got your group on, to lock your party. Otherwise you can get like your brother, your sister, your child trying to join you in the room. But it's about finding what medium works best that fits your group of employees. There is no reason to not engage with people.
Yeah, well said. So guys, let's look at this further out. A year ago, none of us knew that this was going to happen. I want you both, if you can, to predict the future. In January of next year, what's this going to look like? What is business going to look like when we've hopefully come out of COVID-19 and when we've hopefully come out of lockdown totally, when we've come out of the furlough scheme? Matthew, I'm going to give you that hospital pass. What is business going to look like in January of next year, please?
I think employees, there'll be redundancies. I think that's the very sad outcome of what's going to happen. So business will be going, but there will be a significant number of redundancies which will be taking place between now and January. And the upshot will be is that hopefully, but by that time there will be a curve coming back out of it. So things will be picking up. If you think of the seasonality, I think that especially in the Eastern region, if you think of the seasonality of hospitality, hopefully they'll have a good Christmas. Everybody will be out there spending money in hotels and office parties. But the issue might then be is that social distancing could be here for a while longer. So your example of a client thinking about meeting up, quarterly in a hotel, that may in itself be very difficult, because one, will the hotels be open? But secondly, and we do hope they are. But secondly, social distancing issues. And I think actually it may be that people realise that they can communicate this way. So I think we're going to see some pain. We've got some more pain to see before we actually start really experiencing coming out of a curve. But there will be some businesses which are doing great, and on the back of what's happening at the moment. The old adage about why make a drama out of a crisis. You can actually be better in terms of what you're doing and find that there are new work streams. And we've only got to look at Zoom and the share price of Zoom over this period of time as to what's happened there. So they must be looking at more developers. They must be looking at whatever it may be, that those jobs that we may lose them in one hand, but they're gained in another. So we can. I'm optimistic, but at the same time have to be a little bit realistic about what's going on.
That's a very good point that you make about Zoom. TikTok is apparently looking to employ 30,000 people globally because of the rise of the penetration. Caroline, come on. What do you think? What's this going to look like in January 2021?
So bearing in mind, I'm from Caucus, and so we've gone through the pandemic, a fire, you name it, we've had it. Somebody sent me an emoji this week, which had got a whole load of, top of the caption, it said July, and the editor was saying, come on guys, we're on next. So there's a school of thought that we've got that or some pestilence coming. I'm excited for the future, however. I don't like how we're all using this unprecedented times. I think I'm going to shout next time somebody says we're existing in unprecedented times. I like to think about we're living in curious times, somewhere we haven't been before. But with curiosity comes excitement. So there's lots of innovations happening. We're working from home, we're using tech, 6 months ago, and I think we're going to keep on building on this innovation. And employment will change. So whereas going to do the weekly shop in the supermarket, we'll be click and collect and drivers. So we'll be creating different types of roles. I think a lot of employees who've had a taste of being furloughed or home working will say, you know what, I'm actually more effective when I'm at home. I don't want the commute. I don't want to drive 3 hours to meet a customer for half an hour and then a 3-hour drive home. I can use my time smarter. So there'll be a whole series of new behaviours coming out of it, new habits, different employment, and there'll be a real people focus is what I'm thinking. We're seeing elements of being kind. LinkedIn is a much kinder place, and I think this is going to carry on. So I'm excited and curious. It's not unprecedented. I'm curious about the future.
Caroline, brilliant. Bravo. And guys, just to wrap up, I've always been told that with a webinar, people want to get 3 or 4 things from it. Matthew, if you were being approached by an individual who's on furlough, who's concerned about their future, and likewise, if you've been approached by an employer who's worried about the future and which direction they should go, what would your advice be to that furloughed worker? What would your advice be to that employer, please?
Do you know what? Be creative. So you could turn around and say the employer could say the job's come to an end, or it's redundant, it may not be there, but you need to work together. And the employment relationship, just to quote the law slightly, there is implied in every contract of employment an implied term of mutual trust and confidence, and that's really that both of you are going to do the best that you're going to do for each other. And so in this relationship at the moment, there's nothing stopping an employee going to an employer and saying, do you know what, I've had this idea or that idea, or rather than making me redundant, I could do this, or I've thought about a sabbatical. Could you keep the role open for about, I know I can't travel, but I've always wanted to write that book or take that A level or whatever. And I think employers and employees at the moment, we need to get out of the sort of the stance of redundancy or nothing else. We were quite creative, and I talked about the financial crash back in 2008, 2009. I remember employers being really creative then in terms of looking at alternatives of, looking at part-time and reduced hours and reduced salaries, and saying, look, we're going to do this for 3 months, are you on board? And then we'll review it, and if we have a good year, we'll pay you back those amounts of money. Now, I'm not saying employers could be able to make those commitments, but if employees and the employers work together, and I know it sounds trite and it all sounds, that, of course we're saying this, but actually you can come out with some solutions. And it may be, the classic thing which we've seen is employers building different streams in terms of what they're doing. A client of mine, a contact of mine, overnight, from producing signs, have been producing sneeze shields. Try saying that with a pint of Adams, Daniel. So sneeze shields, which nobody had ever heard of these things. They hadn't even heard of them themselves, but used their technology and their skills to produce them. Another client who produced cleaning materials and cleaning equipment into all manner of sectors, including the sort of fresh produce and the food manufacturing process, realised that they had developed a freestanding stand for dispensing hand sanitizer, which they're now exporting throughout Europe. So I think in terms of employees can come up with ideas and working together, that's what I'd say. Don't sit there, don't take the trench warfare approach to things. Move on, talk to each other, and hopefully you may be beyond Dragon's Den with the next new idea, which could be making your business millions.
Caroline, he's very good, isn't he?
He is, and actually, I'm just going to build on that just very slightly. So HR can be both the very best job when you're recruiting an employee, but equally we get a lot to lead the tough conversations too. There is nothing better when you're in a consultation process than an employee coming, at the second meeting and say, I've been having a think, and after the shock, how would it be if?
Wow.
There's nothing better, honestly, if just more employees had that courage to come back. And quite often we're able to accommodate parts of it, not always, but it's just the best thing when you're in a tough room, in a tough meeting, and the employee cares enough to come up with an alternative. So absolutely encourage it as much as possible.
Fantastic. And Caroline, just as we're running out of time, anything else from your perspective to wrap up as to how you would look to advise that furloughed worker, how you'd look to advise that employer?
So just keep talking. Everybody's really scared right now. The business owners, the employer are scared. The individual who's been at home, who may or may not have childcare sorted out. It's a whole brave new world. Just keep talking and work together to come up with a solution. Well
done, Matthew. Thank you very much. Caroline, thank you very much. I'm going to steal a phrase from one of our other webinars, where there's a lovely lady from South Africa said, "Never waste a crisis." And I think this last stage of this webinar just showed that from both of you, and Caroline, especially yourself, that everything that yourself, your team, and Caucus Chris have gone through, you can just see how you're going to accelerate growth-wise when you get out of this the other end. So I think the future is bright. Yes, there's going to be some speed bumps along the way, but we've all got to think differently. We've got to pivot. It's a new norm. It's a new reset. But if we punch on through, we'll be in a far better place post this whole lockdown period. Caroline, thank you very much. Matthew, thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated, and keep safe. And we'll see you on the next webcast.
Lovely. Thank you, Trio.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Matthew.